In the sprawling, restless city of Boston lived a young woman named Nora Reynolds. To the wealthy family she served and the hurried strangers she passed on cobblestone streets, she was nearly invisible, just another nanny in a second-hand coat, another set of hands that fed children and folded laundry and disappeared into converted closets when her work was done. The Dawson mansion sat on Beacon Hill, all limestone and arched windows and the kind of quiet that money buys. Nora had lived there for 3 years. She woke at 4:38 in the morning, before the sun touched the windows, before the house remembered it was occupied. She dressed in the darkness of her converted closet on the 3rd floor, a room barely larger than a bathroom, and moved through the marble hallways like a ghost, quiet and faithful and invisible. 14-hour days began before dawn. Breakfast for Emma and her older brother Marcus. Packing their lunch boxes with sandwiches cut into precise triangles because Rachel Dawson had opinions about triangles. Driving them to school in the Range Rover that smelled like expensive leather and air freshener. Returning to the mansion to fold laundry that cost more than everything Nora owned. The sheets alone were Egyptian cotton, 500 thread count, soft in a way that made her hands ache with the unfairness of it. She moved through rooms that smelled of perfume and inheritance. Rooms where Rachel Dawson's friends gathered over wine at noon, speaking about renovations and vacation homes and their children's test scores. They spoke around Nora as if she were furniture. Once, one of them had actually patted her shoulder while asking her to refill a glass, the way you might pat a dog. Her own life was compressed into a space the size of a closet. One bed with white sheets. One dresser. One window that overlooked the servants' alley where the garbage cans lived. And on the highest shelf, hidden beneath folded sweaters she never wore, a single treasured object, a child's first pair of shoes from the shelter. Small and worn, laces frayed, the leather cracked in places. She did not let anyone see how she held them some nights, how she pressed them to her chest like they were her own heartbeat. The Dawsons paid her enough to survive but never enough to leave. $28,000 a year. The salary was designed precisely for this, enough that she could not afford to quit, not enough that she could ever get ahead. She sent almost everything home to her sister Claire in Providence. Claire had 3 children. Claire's car had been hit by a drunk driver last year. The hospital bills were staggering. $47,000. Then another surgery. Then infections. Now it was $47,000, and then another $18,000, and then $5,000 more for physical therapy, and the total was climbing like water rising in a locked room. 2 weeks ago, Claire's lawyer had sent a letter. Final notice. If the hospital bills were not paid in full by November 15th, they would file for foreclosure on her house. $22,000 in 14 days. Nora had read that number so many times it had stopped meaning anything. It was just shapes. 22,000. She counted her money every night in that closet room. $78 in her wallet. Not nearly enough. She had sold her phone. She had taken extra shifts cleaning houses in the evening after Emma slept. She had stopped eating lunch. The refrigerator at the Dawson mansion was a landscape of abundance, organic vegetables, grass-fed beef, imported cheese, and she walked past it 100 times a day without taking anything that was not hers. Today was different. Today Rachel Dawson was hosting a charity luncheon at Caruso's, the most exclusive Italian restaurant in the city. 50 wealthy women in designer dresses. A fundraiser for something expensive and meaningless. Nora's job was to serve champagne, clear plates, remain invisible. She dressed in the plain black uniform that made her look like a servant. Because she was a servant. The truth of that sat in her stomach like a stone. The restaurant's private dining room gleamed with crystal and silver. Sunlight poured through tall windows. The women arranged themselves like pieces on a chessboard, each one positioned to be seen. Rachel Dawson stood near the center of the room, loud enough for everyone to hear, gesturing with her champagne flute. "This is what happens when you trust the help with anything important," she announced. She held up a shattered crystal vase, the pieces glinting like broken teeth. "My nanny, if you can even call her that, dropped a $4,000 baccarat piece because she was too busy staring at her phone like the trashy little nobody she is. Nora stood frozen at the edge of the room, champagne tray trembling in her hands. The faces around her blurred into a watercolor of expensive skin and expensive hair and expensive satisfaction. "Mrs. Dawson, I wasn't on my phone," Nora said. Her voice came out small, barely a whisper. Emma bumped the table and I tried to catch it. "Anne, are you calling my daughter a liar?" Rachel's voice turned sharp as broken glass. "You're lucky I don't dock your salary for the next 6 months. Actually, I think I will. $78 a week until it's paid off. Now get out of my sight before I fire you entirely." The women laughed. Some uncomfortable, some delighted. Nora's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She had learned long ago that tears were a luxury she could not afford. She set down the champagne tray with steady hands and turned toward the kitchen. What she did not see was the private booth in the back corner of the restaurant, partially hidden behind an ornate lattice screen. What she did not see was the man who sat there with his elbows on the table, his dark eyes following her across the room like a blade following its target. Luca Caruso was 34 years old and had been running the Boston underworld since he was 23. His father had taught him violence like other fathers teach their sons to ride a bicycle, methodically, thoroughly, without mercy. Luca had learned well. He had learned too well. Now he wore tailored suits that cost $3,000. Gold watches worth 10 times more. A diamond ring on his left hand that caught the light and threw it back like a warning. His face was sharp and severe, all angles and intensity, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, a souvenir from his father's final lesson, the one that had happened on Luca's 15th birthday. Across the table from him sat Tony and Gino, his most trusted lieutenants. Tony was thick-necked and scarred, muscles pressing against his black suit. Gino was leaner, faster, with eyes that noticed everything. Both men had been with Luca for over a decade. Both men would die if he asked them to. Luca's fork had stopped halfway to his mouth. He had been eating osso buco, veal that had been braised for 8 hours, a dish prepared specifically for him by the owner. The fork hung suspended in the air while his dark eyes tracked Nora's movement across the room. She was thin. Not delicate thin, but worn thin, like a canvas that had been painted over 1,000 times until the original image was barely visible anymore. Her hands shook as she moved. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it had to hurt. And there, just barely visible at the edge of her collar where her black uniform gaped slightly, a bruise. "Boss," Tony said quietly. "That's the Dawson nanny. Rachel comes here twice a month, tips like shit, treats the staff like they're ghosts." Luca did not respond. He was watching the way Nora held herself together. The careful movements. The way she flinched when Rachel Dawson raised her voice. The limp as she turned away, slight, easily missed, but there. "Her name is Nora," Gino said. Gino worked differently than Tony. Gino paid attention to things that did not matter on the surface. "She's been with the Dawsons for 3 years. Lives in their house. 14-hour days. They own her basically." Luca raised one hand for silence. His gaze never left Nora as she disappeared into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind her, and the restaurant resumed its normal rhythm of clinking glasses and polite conversation. "Find out everything," Luca said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Where she came from. Who her family is. What she owes money for. Why she has that bruise on her neck. You're interested in the nanny." Tony sounded confused. Luca set down his fork with deliberate precision. He had learned from his father that violence was often silent. Power was often quiet. A man who needed to shout was a man who was already losing. "I'm interested in the way the room laughed at her," Luca said. "I'm interested in the way she didn't cry. I'm interested in why she has a bruise on her neck that someone tried to hide with makeup, and in why she moved like her ribs hurt. Now find out." In the kitchen, Nora stood at the sink and counted backward from 100 in her head. This was how she managed. She counted. She breathed. She did not let the world break her in public. The kitchen was chaos, 3 chefs moving in synchronized violence, a sous chef shouting about timing, the hiss and sizzle of 100 things cooking at once. But Nora existed in her own small pocket of stillness, her hands moving through dishwater that burned her skin, her mind already calculating. $78. 14 days. $22,000. The math would not work. It never worked. It was designed not to work. The system was a machine built to keep people like her exactly where she was, visible just enough to serve, invisible enough that their pain did not matter. She had survived worse than this. She had survived the shelter as a child. She had survived hunger. She had survived her mother's addiction and her father's absence. She had survived the feeling of being completely alone in a world that did not care if she lived or died. She would survive this too. The restaurant's back door stood open, and through it came the October wind, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust and the city at dusk. Somewhere in that city, her sister was waiting to hear whether she would lose her house. Somewhere in that city, Claire's children were drawing pictures or doing homework or simply existing in the way children do, unaware that their mother was terrified, unaware that the foundation beneath their lives was cracking. Nora dried her hands on a towel. Her palms were red and raw, the skin cracked and bleeding in places. The water had been too hot. It always was. She did not know that the man in the private booth had just made 3 phone calls. She did not know that by tomorrow morning, every detail of her life would be spread across his desk like a map. She did not know that in a city controlled by one of the most dangerous men alive, she had just been seen. And being seen, she was about to discover, was far more dangerous than remaining invisible. The October wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice. Nora Reynolds stood at the kitchen sink of the Dawson mansion, her hand submerged in water so hot it burned, the steam rising in ghostly shapes that disappeared the moment they touched air. It was 11:51 p.m. Everyone else had gone to bed. The house settled into that particular silence of wealth, no creaking floorboards, no thin walls carrying neighbors' voices, just the soft hum of a refrigerator that cost more than Nora's annual salary and the distant sound of rain beginning to fall outside. She had been calculating numbers in her head all evening. $78. That was what remained after she sent $242 of her $320 weekly paycheck to her sister Claire's hospital. 14 days until the payment deadline. $22,000 that Claire did not have. Medical bills from the car accident 6 months ago. Physical therapy. The surgery they said she needed or her leg would never heal properly. The system did not care that Claire had 2 children. The system did not care that Claire had been a good person her entire life. The system was a machine designed to grind people like them into dust and call it mathematics. Nora's palms were cracked and bleeding where the hot water had split the skin. She did not feel it anymore. Her body had learned to separate itself from pain, to move through hours and days and months without registering the damage being done. She dried her hands on a kitchen towel embroidered with a Dawson family crest, an absurdity Nora had never understood. A family crest for people who had inherited their money 2 generations ago. She hung the towel on its hook, the same hook it had hung from every night for 3 years, and began climbing the back stairs toward the 3rd floor. The mansion's main staircase was marble and mahogany, a statement piece that had appeared in some design magazine 5 years ago. The back stairs were narrow and dark, built 100 years ago when servants were meant to be invisible. Nora climbed them by memory, her footsteps making no sound on the worn wood. She had learned how to move through this house like a ghost. That was part of survival. Be useful, be silent, be forgettable. Her room was a converted closet on the 3rd floor, past the children's bedrooms, past the guest rooms that no one ever used. 3 meters long, 2 meters wide, 1 narrow window that looked out onto the adjacent building's brick wall. There was a single bed, a small dresser, a shelf above the bed. Everything she owned fit inside these walls. Clothes in the dresser. Books stacked on the window sill. And on the shelf, the only object she treasured, a pair of child shoes, small and worn, the leather cracked with age, the laces frayed. They had belonged to her once, 18 years ago. A woman at the shelter had given them to her. Said every child deserves something new. Those shoes had been the first gift Nora ever received. She had carried them through 5 moves, 2 cities, countless nights sleeping in her car. They were the only thing that proved she had ever been a child worthy of care. Nora sat on her bed and pulled out her calculator from under the mattress. She also pulled out 3 pieces of paper, creased and worn from repeated handling. The first was a hospital bill. The second was an eviction notice for Claire's apartment. The third was a letter from the financial aid office saying that Emma, not her Emma, but her niece Emma, named after the little girl upstairs, would lose her spot in school if the tuition was not paid by November 1st. The numbers had not changed since yesterday, or the day before. $78 divided among 3 catastrophes yielded nothing but mathematics that broke your heart. She heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Her body tensed automatically, a reflex from another life, another man. The footsteps passed. She released a breath she did not know she was holding. The clock on the shelf read 12:13 a.m. She set her alarm for 5:06 a.m. 5.5 hours until she had to wake and begin again. Earlier that evening, something had happened that Nora had not fully registered in the moment. She had been serving dinner when one of the children's friends arrived, a boy whose father owned significant real estate throughout Boston. The conversation at the dinner table had turned to investments, to the kind of casual talk about money that people with money engage in. Rachel Dawson had laughed at something someone said, a sharp, cutting laugh, and glanced toward where Nora stood with the wine bottle. Staff, Rachel had said, not to Nora but past her, as though Nora were a lamp or a chair. They hear everything, understand nothing. You could discuss your entire financial empire in front of her and she would forget it by morning. They don't have the capacity to retain complex information. No one had corrected her. No one even looked uncomfortable. Nora had simply poured the wine and stepped back into the shadows. But what she did not know was that someone had been watching her that evening. Someone had seen the way her hand shook slightly as she poured. Someone had noticed the bruise on her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve, that had not been there 3 weeks ago. Someone had heard the crack in her voice when Emma asked if Nora could help with homework and Rachel said, "Emma, Nora is the help. Not a tutor." 3 blocks away, in a restaurant that required reservations booked 6 months in advance, a man named Luca Caruso was finishing dinner with his lieutenants Tony and Gino. They sat in a private booth, the kind of booth where important conversations happened, where men discussed things that could not be discussed in public. Luca was 34 years old, 6'2", with dark hair that had just begun to silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a suit that cost $12,000, tailored to fit his shoulders perfectly. On his left wrist sat a watch worth more than most people's houses. 2 faint scars ran from his left eye toward his jaw, the legacy of a fight when he was 18, the fight that had cemented his reputation in Boston's underworld as someone who could not be hurt and therefore did not need to be feared. He was loved by his men because he was fair. He was feared by his enemies because he was utterly without mercy. He had built his empire quietly, carefully, systematically. He did not boast. He did not need to. The city knew his name the way people knew the names of natural disasters, with a mixture of respect and caution. But Luca Caruso did not believe in coincidence. And he had seen something tonight that troubled him. A woman's face. Red marks on her neck. The particular way she stood, the way people stand when they have learned to take up as little space as possible. He had lived too long in darkness not to recognize it in others. Meanwhile, upstairs in the Dawson mansion, Emma Dawson could not sleep. She was 7 years old, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's distracted eyes. She had gotten out of bed 3 times already, needing water, needing a nightlight adjusted, needing Nora. It was 1:08 a.m. when Emma finally padded down the back stairs in her bare feet and knocked on Nora's door. Nora had not been asleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, running the numbers again, looking for a combination that would work, some mathematics that could save her sister. She opened the door and found Emma standing there in her pink pajamas, her blonde hair mussed from the pillow. "I had a bad dream," Emma whispered. Nora did not hesitate. She took the child's hand and led her back upstairs to the bedroom, pulled back the covers, and lay down beside her. Emma tucked herself against Nora's side, her small hand gripping Nora's shirt. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" Emma asked. "I will stay," Nora said. She stroked the child's hair the same way she had learned to comfort herself as a child, running her fingers through soft blonde strands until Emma's breathing deepened and her hand uncurled. But Emma had asked Nora something earlier that week, something that had lodged in Nora's chest like a splinter. They were in the library, and Nora was reading to her, and Emma had looked up and said, "Nora? Are you sad all the time?" Nora had not answered immediately. She had kept reading, kept her voice steady and bright, but the question lived in her now. She stayed beside Emma until the child's breathing became sleep, then carefully removed herself and returned to her closet. At 2:17 a.m., she sat on her bed and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to cry. She set a timer on her phone. 2 minutes. No more. After 2 minutes, she washed her face in the small sink in her room, looked at herself in the mirror, and saw exactly what Rachel Dawson saw: a nobody, a girl without options, a woman whose pain was simply the cost of her usefulness. She did not know that in less than 3 weeks, everything she believed about her invisibility would be proven catastrophically, dangerously wrong. She did not know that the man 3 blocks away had just made 3 phone calls, one to a man at Boston Police, one to a financial investigator, one to someone in the hospital where medical records were kept. She did not know that by morning, every detail of her life would be photographed, documented, spread across a desk like a map of a territory he was about to enter. She did not know that being seen by Luca Caruso was far more dangerous than remaining invisible. It was, in fact, the most dangerous thing that could ever happen to her, or the most saving one. She simply did not know yet which it would be. The October wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice, carrying dead leaves and the smell of rain about to fall. Nora Reynolds sat in her 1998 Honda in the breakdown lane of Route 128, watching her breath fog the windshield, her one good eye fixed on the smoking hood. The engine had died 6 miles from the Dawson mansion. She had $78 in her pocket. A tow truck would cost $120. She had already done the math 3 times, as if doing it again might change the answer. The temperature was dropping. Her thin coat, the only one she owned, was no protection against the November cold creeping through the car windows. She had no gloves. Her fingers had stopped feeling pain about 20 minutes ago, which she knew was not a good sign. She was trying to decide whether to walk back toward the highway or stay put and hope someone would stop, when she saw the headlights. 3 black SUVs rounded the curve behind her, moving fast, their tinted windows reflecting nothing. The convoy slowed as it approached. Nora's entire body went rigid. Men in expensive cars did not stop to help waitresses with broken-down vehicles. Men in expensive cars either ignored you completely or made your situation infinitely worse. The lead SUV pulled in front of her car. Doors opened with precision, the kind of synchronized movement that spoke of training. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, expensive tailored suit despite the bitter cold, dark hair swept back from a face that looked carved from stone. He moved toward her vehicle with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to obedience. Even through the windshield, even in the darkness, there was something about him that made her breath catch. He tapped on her window. She rolled it down, terrified. "Miss. You need help." His voice was deep and solid, like an oath being sworn. Like a man used to giving orders and seeing them carried out without question. Nora tried to speak and found her throat would not cooperate. Up close, she could see his face more clearly, sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, a thin scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone. He was studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the seat. "My car broke down." "I'm sorry, I'll move it, I can call someone," she was rambling, which she did when she was frightened. "What is your name?" he asked. "Nora. Nora Reynolds." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if the name meant something. As if he recognized her. "Where are you coming from?" "Work. I'm a nanny. My car just died." He was looking at her more intently now, his gaze moving from her face to her torn coat to her hands gripping the steering wheel. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" She almost laughed. Safe. As if safety was something people like her ever had access to. "I'll figure it out," she said, which was what she always said. He opened her car door. "My driver will have your vehicle towed. You will come with me." It was not a question. It was not even phrased as an offer. It was simply stated as a fact, the way he might tell one of his men to do something. Nora should have been terrified. Instead, something in his tone made her realize that this man, whoever he was not going to hurt her. She got out of the car on shaking legs. One of his men, a thick-bodied man with kind eyes, was already photographing her license plate and calling a tow truck on his phone. The other man, lean and watchful, was scanning the empty highway as if expecting a threat. They both moved with the same trained precision as their boss. They worked for someone important. Someone dangerous. The boss led her to the lead SUV and opened the back door. "Get in." She climbed in. The interior was leather and warmth, climate-controlled, smelling of expensive cologne and something she couldn't identify. He sat across from her, separated by several feet of space, but his presence filled the entire vehicle. "Your car broke down," he said, not asking. "The engine started making a noise this morning, but I couldn't afford to fix it, so I just kept driving and hoping it would." She stopped. She was doing it again, rambling. "Where do you work?" "The Dawson Mansion." "In Cambridge." "I take care of their daughter, Emma." "She's 5. Just saying Emma's name made her chest tighten. She had not planned to leave tonight. She had not planned any of this. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dark. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, but somehow more intense. "What is your situation?" She almost asked what he meant. Then she realized he was asking about everything. All of it. Her life, her circumstances, her desperation. He was asking because some part of him already understood. "I have $78, she said quietly. "I have rent due in 4 days. I have my sister's medical bills that are $22,000 and due in 2 weeks, and if I don't get her the treatment she needs, she's going to lose her leg. I have a closet-sized room in a mansion where nobody sees me, and I have a job where I'm paid enough to survive but not enough to leave. That's my situation." He did not flinch. He did not offer platitudes or false sympathy. He just listened, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "What is your sister's name?" he asked. "Maya. She's only 20. She was hit by a car and the hospital won't proceed with her surgery until the balance is paid." "And your family?" "Dead. Car accident when I was 18. I raised Maya from then on. That's why I work as much as I do." The man across from her was silent for so long that she thought perhaps he had decided to end this conversation, to return her to the highway and forget he had ever seen her. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. "My name is Luca Caruso," he said. "I own the restaurant where you worked 3 weeks ago. You served my table. My lieutenant told me you did not accept the tip we left because you thought it was a mistake." Nora's stomach dropped. She remembered that night, remembered serving what seemed like an impossibly elegant man and his men, remembered the white envelope with cash that seemed too generous, remembered standing in the kitchen afterward and crying because she was so terrified of the mistake. "I couldn't take money that wasn't meant for me," she whispered. "It was meant for you," Luca Caruso said simply. "Everything about your life suggests that you have been invisible for a long time, Nora Reynolds. People look past you. They do not see you. But I see you." The SUV was moving now, though she had not felt it start. The highway light slid past the windows in a steady rhythm, and somewhere behind them, Tony was calling in favors to have her car towed and fixed. Somewhere in the city ahead, Tony said there was a place waiting for her. A place where she would not be invisible. A place where someone had decided, with the finality of an oath, that she deserved to be seen. Nora did not know that this ride would change everything. She did not know that by tomorrow morning she would be safe in a way she had not been safe in 5 years. She did not know that the man across from her had already made phone calls about Douglas Hale, about the violence and the obsession, about what needed to happen next. What she knew was this: for the first time in her entire life, someone powerful had stopped for her. Someone important had asked her name. Someone with the kind of authority that made trained men move in synchronized silence had decided that her life mattered. The car cut through the October darkness toward the city lights beyond, carrying her toward a future she could not yet imagine, while the man called Luca Caruso watched her face with the expression of someone who had finally found the person he had been looking for, even though he had not known he was searching. Behind them, Tony pressed his phone to his ear and spoke quietly into the night, "We have the car." "What about Hale?" Luca's voice was soft when he answered, but it carried the weight of an inevitable reckoning. "By morning, he will learn what it costs to touch something that belongs under my protection." The SUV accelerated toward Boston, and Nora Reynolds, who had been invisible for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, finally understood that her life had just been divided into 2 parts, before this moment, and everything that would come after. The warehouse door slammed shut with a sound like a coffin lid closing. Douglas Hale hung suspended in the metal chair, his body racked with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than fear. Blood dripped from his broken nose onto the concrete floor, each drop marking time in the suffocating silence. 2 hours had passed since Tony dragged him from the street corner where he had been waiting for Nora, since rough hands threw him into the black SUV, since the world he thought he controlled collapsed into nothing. The single overhead light cast shadows that made the concrete room feel like a tomb. Hale's breathing came in ragged gasps, his tough guy armor shattered completely. His right eye was swelling shut. His jaw throbbed with electric pain. But worse than the physical agony was the realization that had been dawning on him for the last hour: he had made a mistake. A catastrophic, life-altering mistake. He had put his hands on a woman who belonged to someone with the power to erase him. The door opened. Footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. Luca Caruso walked into the light wearing an open white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his dark eyes holding the cold clarity of a man who had made a decision and would see it through to its bitter end. He said nothing. He simply circled Hale's chair like a general surveying a battlefield, his Italian leather shoes clicking softly on concrete with each step. Hale tried to find his voice, to resurrect the bravado that had always protected him before. "Do you know who I work for? Frankie DeLuca will burn your whole operation. You're making a huge..." Luca's fist crashed into his jaw like a sledgehammer. Hale's head snapped backward. Blood sprayed across his shirt. He screamed, a raw animal sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. When Luca leaned down and gripped his hair, forcing eye contact, his voice came out soft and measured, like thunder described in a whisper. "You put your hands on a woman named Nora Reynolds. You strangled her until she could not breathe. You beat her face until she could not see from one eye. You told her you would kill her if she ever left you." Luca paused, his dark eyes burning with something that made Hale's blood freeze. "She was already broken when you found her. And you decided to break her further." Hale spat blood, trying one last time. "That bitches." The second punch came faster than thought. Hale's nose cracked with a wet, sickening sound. He screamed until his throat gave out, until screaming became just a broken rasp of breath. Luca released him, stepped back, and pulled his phone from his pocket. He made a call, speaking in Italian, his voice steady as stone. When he switched back to English, it was for Hale's benefit alone. "It is done. Come get him." Hope flickered in Hale's eyes. Maybe this was over. Maybe he would live. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the warehouse windows. An engine cut off. 3 men walked through the door, and Hale's hope shattered like glass. He recognized one immediately, Mickey Torino, an enforcer for the Gallo family, a crew that made the streets of Boston run with blood. The Gallos were Luca's rivals. The Gallos were the kind of men who made bodies disappear into the harbor where they would never be found. Hale's voice climbed to a shriek. No. No, please. Just kill me. Just kill me, please. Luca's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Death would be too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. He looked at Mickey with the expression of a man conducting business. His debt to the Gallo family is $150,000. Past transgressions, all documented. I trust you will find creative ways to collect. Mickey smiled, a shark smile, cold and empty of mercy. We'll take real good care of him, Caruso. Real good care. They dragged Hale from the chair. He fought, he screamed, he begged with the desperation of a man who suddenly understood that death would have been the mercy he refused to ask for. His voice echoed through the warehouse even as they hauled him toward the black van, begging, sobbing like a child separated from its mother. The warehouse door closed. Tony emerged from the shadows where he had watched everything, his face unreadable. He approached his boss slowly. The Gallos will destroy him. Piece by piece. He'll spend the rest of his life wishing you had just killed him. Luca did not look away from the closed door. Yes. In all the years I have worked for you, I have never seen you hand someone to them before. Luca's jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, which somehow made it more terrifying. He hurt her, Tony. He took a woman who had already survived things that would break most people, and he tried to destroy her completely. There is no punishment in this world severe enough for that. But 40 years of suffering is an acceptable compromise. Tony nodded slowly, understanding settling into his bones like cold concrete. His boss had crossed a line he had never crossed before, and it was all because of a nanny with $78 and a face covered in bruises. 1 week later, the October sun hung low over Boston, painting the sky in shades of copper and ash. Nora stood in the upstairs hallway of the Dawson mansion wearing clothes that actually fit her, her bruises faded to yellow and green, her eyes clear from both sides. The child's shoes rested in her hands, worn leather soft from decades of carrying a child's weight. She had been staying at Luca's estate for 8 days. 8 days of real food, of a bed that felt like clouds, of Maria treating her like a daughter instead of a servant. But Emma's voice from the phone calls haunted her. Nora, where are you? Mommy says you left because you don't love me anymore. She had to come back. Not to this house, never to stay in this house again. But to explain. To say goodbye properly. To retrieve the one thing that mattered. Luca had insisted on accompanying her. Now he stood beside her in a charcoal suit that cost more than everything she had owned 3 weeks ago, his presence filling the hallway with the weight of his authority. Tony waited by the door, patient as stone. Nora's hands trembled as she rang the bell. This was her first time using the front entrance. Always before, she had slipped in through the service door like she was something that needed to be hidden. Rachel Dawson answered mid-sentence, irritated at the interruption. Then she saw Nora and her face transformed, shock first, then rage. Where the hell have you been? You abandoned your post, you left Emma crying for days, you. She stopped. She had noticed Luca behind Nora. Tall, expensive, the kind of man whose presence filled a doorway and made people smaller. Rachel's voice changed instantly, became something calculating and false. I'm sorry, who are you? Luca smiled with no warmth at all. Luca Caruso. I own the restaurant where you enjoyed humiliating my staff 3 weeks ago. The color drained from Rachel's face. She knew that name. Everyone in Boston knew that name. It was just a misunderstanding. The vase. You called her trash. You docked her pay for 6 months over $4,000 that you have in your purse right now. You worked her 14 hours a day for 3 years and paid her $320 a week to sleep in a space smaller than most people's closets. Luca's voice never raised, which made it infinitely more dangerous. You made her invisible. You made her feel like nothing. That's between me and my employee. Former employee. Nora's voice, stronger than Rachel had ever heard it, cut through the air like a blade. I quit. I'm here for my things and to say goodbye to Emma. Rachel's shock morphed into something uglier. You can't quit. You signed a contract. I'll sue you for breach. I'll take everything you. Luca stepped forward. Rachel stepped backward, her words dying in her throat. His voice was soft, the kind of soft that made threats sound like poetry. You will do nothing. Nora is under my protection now. If you contact her, if you threaten her, if you even speak her name in anger, I will take a very personal interest in your husband's real estate business. I understand he has some creative accounting practices. It would be a shame if the IRS received an anonymous tip with detailed documentation. Rachel's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. Mr. Dawson appeared behind her, pale-faced and trembling. He knew exactly what Luca Caruso was capable of. He placed a hand on his wife's shoulder with the firmness of a man who had just made a calculation about survival. Rachel! Let her get her things. Rachel was shaking with rage but trapped, caged by her own fear. Nora climbed the stairs to her closet room with Luca and Tony behind her. When Luca saw where she had lived, 6 feet by 8 feet, one narrow window that faced a brick wall, no heat, a cot instead of a bed, a single shelf for her belongings, his jaw tightened so hard that Tony heard his teeth grind against each other. Nora gathered her few possessions in silence. A change of clothes. A book she had read 7 times. Her identification documents. Then she reached under the pillow and withdrew the child's shoes, small, worn, the leather creased from decades of use. She held them to her chest like they were made of glass. Emma's room was down the hallway, bright with drawings and stuffed animals. The 6-year-old was coloring at her small desk when Nora appeared in the doorway. Emma's face transformed. She ran to Nora with the complete trust of a child who had learned that this woman was safe. Nora! You came back. Nora knelt and pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her apple-scented shampoo, holding her small body against her own. Tears came, the kind she had not allowed herself to shed in weeks. Sweet girl, I have to go away for a while. But it is not because I do not love you. I love you more than anything in this world. Emma pulled back, her small face confused and frightened. Why can't you stay? Because I need to take care of myself now. But you are so smart and so kind and so brave. And you are going to grow up to be something amazing. Never let anyone make you feel small, okay? Never. Emma nodded, not understanding but trusting the sincerity in Nora's voice. Nora kissed her forehead, stood, and turned to leave. But as they walked down the grand staircase, Rachel could not help herself. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her voice sharp as broken glass. You are nothing. You will always be nothing. A pathetic little nobody who... Luca stopped. He turned slowly. His stare silenced her mid-sentence. He did not raise his voice. You spent 3 years breaking a woman who had already survived more than you could imagine. You took her labor. You took her time. You took her heart. And you treated her like garbage because it made you feel powerful. Rachel's knees buckled. Mr. Dawson caught her elbow. But I am not going to hurt you, Mrs. Dawson. I am going to do something far worse. I am going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. He pulled out his phone and made a call on speaker. Gloria? Luca Caruso. I have a story for your society column. Gloria Reynolds, Boston's most feared columnist, answered on the second ring. Rachel Dawson of Beacon Hill has been systematically abusing her household staff. 14-hour days. Paid below minimum wage. Housed in a closet. Publicly humiliated. I have documentation and photographs of the living conditions. I think your readers would be interested. Gloria's delighted voice crackled through the speaker. Oh, they absolutely will be. Send everything over immediately. Luca hung up and looked at Rachel with the expression of a man who had just erased her future. By tomorrow morning, every charity board you sit on, every social circle you belong to, every person you call friend will know what you did. You wanted to make her invisible? Let us see how you like it. Rachel collapsed into a chair, her social life, her reputation, her entire identity crumbling like ash. Outside, the October air was cold and clean. Nora held the child's shoes and breathed deeply, feeling lighter than she had in 3 years. The mansion behind them was already becoming a memory, a dark chapter closing. Luca opened the car door for her. You are safe now. You didn't have to do all that, Nora whispered. Yes, I did. As they drove away from Beacon Hill, toward the city lights and the future waiting somewhere beyond the horizon, neither of them knew what was coming next. Neither of them knew that Luca had made a call to a jeweler that morning. That a small velvet box was waiting on his desk. That in 4 days, he would ask her a question that would change everything. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The velvet box sat on Luca's desk for 4 days before he was ready to use it. He did not plan speeches. He did not rehearse words. He simply waited until the moment felt right, which arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening in the back booth of Caruso's, the private one, where everything had changed 6 months earlier. Nora arrived at 7 o'clock, still wearing her manager's blazer, her hair pulled back in the same efficient knot she wore during shifts. She had stopped trying to impress him months ago. She simply existed now, and that was enough. You asked me to meet you. She slid into the booth across from him. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her the way he had looked at her every day since she kissed him in this restaurant and broke 6 months of careful distance. Like she was the only real thing in a world made of shadows. I wanted to ask you something, he said finally. His voice carried the weight of a decision made long before this moment. Nora's breath caught. She knew what was coming. She had known for weeks. But knowing and living it were different things. He reached into his jacket and withdrew the velvet box. Small. Black. Containing everything. I am not a good man, he said, opening it. The diamond caught the candlelight and splintered it into 1,000 fractured stars. I have done terrible things. I will do terrible things. That will not change. But I can promise you this, I will never look away from you. I will never make you invisible. Every day for the rest of my life, I will choose to see you. He stood and moved to her side of the booth, dropping onto one knee on the restaurant floor. Nora's hands covered her mouth. Tears tracked down her cheeks. Nora Reynolds, will you marry me? She pulled him up and kissed him instead of answering, but the answer was in the kiss, in the way she held him, in the sound of her voice when she finally whispered yes against his mouth. In the kitchen, Tony heard Gino's whoop of joy and smiled into his sauce. 1 year passed like water through open hands, gentle, nourishing, necessary. Nora stood in the manager's office of Caruso's, reviewing the October schedule. $78,000 a year, that number she had requested deliberately, a reminder of the girl who had owned nothing but $78 and 3 years of survival. The restaurant hummed beyond the glass walls, the lunch service in full motion, forks and glasses and the low murmur of conversation that sounded like contentment. Her desk held photographs now. Emma at the Science Museum, age 8, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. Her sister Miranda, healed and whole, visiting from Connecticut. And a photograph from the proposal. Tony had captured Luca on one knee, the candlelight gilding his dark hair, Nora's face transformed by astonishment and love. The child's shoes still sat on the mantel of their apartment. She would never put them anywhere else. Her phone buzzed. A text from Luca, finishing early. Dinner at home? She replied, I will cook. Cooking had become something she did for love now instead of survival. There was a difference in the taste. Rachel Dawson arranged flowers at the community center on Charles Street, her fingers moving through the motions with the mechanical efficiency of a woman who had become accustomed to penance. The tax fraud investigation had concluded 8 months ago. The judge had been lenient due to her community service sentence, but leniency was relative. Every charity board she had joined since college had removed her name. Every friend had quietly, deliberately stopped answering her calls. The Boston Society pages, once her domain, now did not mention her at all. Erasure was a punishment far more precise than any prison sentence. Mr. Dawson had filed for divorce 6 months in. The papers had been delivered to her lawyer on a Tuesday morning in April. Rachel had not cried. She had simply understood that the life she had built on cruelty had been built on sand, and sand cannot hold the weight of years. Emma was happier now. That was the only thing Rachel could take with her, the small consolation that her daughter was happier without her daily presence, her casual contempt, her need to diminish everyone around her. Emma spent her weekends with Nora Reynolds, who took her to museums and bookstores and taught her to see beauty instead of possessions. Rachel had become someone else. Not good, perhaps, but diminished in her capacity for cruelty. Even monsters can be broken. Douglas Hale had disappeared 2 years ago. There had been rumors, of course, the kind that spread through Boston's underworld like smoke. That the Caruso organization had discovered his location in a basement apartment in Revere. That they had extracted him at midnight. That he had been shipped to a work camp somewhere in Eastern Europe where men like him did not return from. But no one asked questions. No one wanted confirmation. The existence of men like Douglas required a kind of deliberate blindness, and Boston had learned to look away. Nora did not think about him anymore. He belonged to the past, and the past was a country she no longer visited. The apartment was small but entirely theirs. 1 bedroom, a living room that faced the street, a kitchen where Nora prepared dinner while Luca read the evening newspaper at the table, his reading glasses sliding down his nose the way they always did. She made pasta from scratch, the kind his mother had taught him to make in a time before violence had hardened his hands. He watched her work, his eyes moving between her face and the newspaper, choosing her over news of the world. Maria wants to plan the wedding, he said, turning a page. She has already selected the venue. Nora laughed. We gave her permission to plan one thing. 1. She is Maria. Permission is irrelevant to her. He folded the newspaper. But I told her to wait for your thoughts. It is your day. Nora stirred the sauce. The smell of garlic and tomato and basil filled the small kitchen, made it feel large and warm and full of possibility. I do not need a grand wedding, she said. I just need you. Everyone else is detail. He stood and moved behind her, his hand settling on her waist. She leaned back against him. You deserve grand things, he said into her hair. I deserve you. That is grand enough. They stood like that while the pasta cooked, while the city moved beyond their windows, while the life they were building settled into the spaces between them like sediment-forming stone. 3 blocks away, at Caruso's, a young server named Marcus dropped a fork during the dinner service. His hand shook as he retrieved it. His face flushed with the particular humiliation of a person who could not afford another mistake. The manager started toward him, already formulating the rebuke, the reminder of how many people wanted his job. Luca's lieutenant Tony raised one hand in a gesture so small it appeared almost accidental. The manager stopped. Leave him, a voice commanded. Deep. Quiet. The kind of quiet that rearranges rooms. Luca Caruso sat in the back booth, the private one, the one reserved for conversations that shaped the city's underworld. But he was not discussing territory or loyalty or the weight of secrets. He was simply watching a young man who had made a small mistake. Everyone starts somewhere, Luca said, his eyes never leaving Marcus. I did. You did. Give him the space to begin. Marcus finished his shift with his hand steady. He did not know who had intervened. He only knew that someone had seen him fail and chosen mercy instead of punishment. That mercy would change the trajectory of his life. Nora and Luca ate dinner at their small table, the one where he had told her about his mother, about the doctor who had looked away, about the power he had built as a shield against a world that destroys gentle people. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, just as she had done in this same apartment a year ago, when the wound of his past was still so close to the surface that touching it made him flinch. He no longer flinched. That was what love did. It gave people permission to heal. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am a fortunate man." His voice was steady, certain in a way she had learned meant he was being truthful. "That once I had nothing but power, and I was alone. And then one October night, I found you on a highway in the rain, and everything changed because I chose not to look away." Nora's eyes glistened. "I used to think invisibility was my fate," she whispered. "That people like me were not meant to be seen. That survival was the only prize we could win. You won more than survival." He turned his hand over beneath hers, intertwined their fingers. "You won a life. You won yourself." The rain began outside without warning, October rain, the kind that had nearly killed her 2 years ago. But now she listened to it against the windows and felt safe. Felt held. Felt like a person worth holding. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. That was the truth the rain whispered, and they sat together in the small apartment, two broken people made whole, listening to the city breathe around them, knowing that tomorrow would come and they would face it together, and that was enough. That was everything. If this story moved your heart, drop a like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to know they are not invisible, that their life matters, that one moment of genuine kindness can alter everything. We post stories like this every single day. Hit that notification bell. And remember, you are seen. You are valued. You are worthy. We will see you again in the next video.